Society for Ethnobiology. They have a code of ethics that you can download from the website. There is the address given. And that is a very useful guideline. But most of it is common sense, basically common decency, but it's good to look at it in detail. On the left, you have an example of a consent form. So we ask all the participants to fill in this consent form. We do it if they are not literate. And we also have witnesses in the case of illiterate people. So we have a formal system of informed consent, an educated informed consent. So the ethical approval also applies to, especially you can see the educated prior informed consent. That's very important. What's also important is the acknowledgement and due credit. And I'll come back to that. Or maybe I should just explain it now. People say that rural participants in an ethnobotanical study should remain anonymous. Their name should not be revealed. I question that. I consider that to be a Eurocentric, old-fashioned way of doing science. Because if you consider that when we write a paper, when we write a scientific paper, and we get some verbal information from another expert, we cannot just use that information. We have to acknowledge the person who gave it to us in the form of a personal communication. So we say, Smith, 2020, PersCom. So I'm asking myself the question, if that is the correct protocol, why do people not acknowledge the contributions of rural participants? I think it is unethical. And in our work since 2008, when we published the first papers, we have always linked each and every use record, each and every little bit of information we have linked to a person, to that person's birth date, so that future generations can look back and say, my grandfather or my great-grandfather contributed to this study. There it is in black and white. I think that is a practice that will gradually become more prevalent, and people will realize that to keep our informants, not to acknowledge the contributions of participants is not ethically correct. Most studies I see, they just say under acknowledgements, we thank the 35 participants in this study for their valuable contributions. In my opinion, that is unethical. That's not good enough. So when we work in rural areas, it's very important to observe local customs. So it is very difficult for, let's say, an English-speaking person to go into a paddy village and start doing ethnobotany. Therefore, hardly with any exception, all my students are studying their own cultures in their own home villages or their own rural areas. Here are two examples of Mahlatsi Mogale, who is a paddy person, and we obtain, there the protocol is that we obtain permission from the chief. The chief needs to know what's going on in his village, and in the formal process, we get permission from the chief. The same happened with Sizwe Kawe's work in the Eastern Cape, where we got permission from the chief to work in the village. The second step is to collect all the information and literature. In this case, it's the Cape literature. That's my favorite topic, and I try to find as much as I can about the history of botanizing and exploration in the Cape region of South Africa. And then we do a reconnaissance trip to find people, participants, and to make contact with people. And then the fourth step, I've already mentioned it. We record all the species, we take photographs, we make a preliminary checklist of species, and we prepare the flip file. And I'll show you what the flip file looks like. So we have a page where we have composite photographs of the habit of the plant, what it looks like, if it's a tree or what. Sometimes the underground parts as well, if that is relevant. So that any participant who knows this plant will be able to recognize it. And then we use the flip file. It's numbered from 1 to 500, whatever. And we page through the flip file and discuss every plant. And this, of course, is especially valuable in an area where there is no, for example, rain, where you have a dry season. Then you cannot find any plants. You cannot find anything. And then we can still do our work. And so we ask only, for our quantification method, we only ask 3 questions. Do you know the plant? Do you have a name for the plant? And do you have a use for the plant? And then we enter it into a matrix. That is why we call it a matrix method, where we can calculate the popularity or how well a particular species is known. And we do this by just summing up the values. You can see 1, 2, 3. 1 means he knew the plant, 2 means he had a name for it, 3 means he had a use for it. So it adds up to 6. So if you add up all those numbers and divide it by the maximum possible numbers, you get the SPI value, the species popularity index. In the same way, and I think this is unique, I've never seen this in any other studies, where we actually also make a measure of the level of knowledge of the person by counting up the scores of each individual person in the same way. And we call this the ethnobotanical knowledge index. And this allows us to compare different villages and to compare certain studies over time to see if there's a loss of information or a gain. The advantages of this method, this quantification method, I think it's fairly obvious. The interview can be done any season or time of the year. And that's a big advantage, especially in the desert where the flowers only come out in spring. There's no need for walking or for searching for plants. And this is especially useful when many of the old people, they can no longer walk even. They have a lot of information. Typically, the old people have lots of information, but they are no longer mobile. So we can sit in the comfort of a house. We can do the work there. All species are covered. It's systematic. It's not random, it's systematic. And the visual aids, the pictures that we have, help people to remember. If they look at the plant, they say, I remember, that is what my grandmother used or whatever. So it helps to jolt the memory. And then we have complete data in the end of high quality. I think we owe it to these to the cultures of South Africa to do a proper job, to record high quality data for posterity. Then we publish in the end, and we have here an example of some papers. The one on the top left is the one where we described for the first time the matrix method. And of course, the information eventually gets into the books. And we have a new initiative to develop regional books on the useful plants. And also we are developing community feedback books where we have bilingual books in English and in the local language, to distribute to schools and to libraries as part of the feedback process, and also to encourage people to become aware of the depth of knowledge that's still present in rural areas. And then the feedback step, I think it's very important. I emphasized it already. People want to know, they want to see you again, they want to know what we have found and so on. They want to know the results. And sometimes it generates great excitement if they see that their faces are in the publication and that they are acknowledged for their contributions. So we do this formally. In the background behind me on the left, you see a poster. And at the bottom, that's not visible, is the faces of all the people who have contributed to that particular study are given with their names and dates of birth to give full recognition for their contributions. What people also do not recognize often and consider is the fact that we are creating in this process of linking names to anecdotes or to use records, we are creating a legal starting point for the records. So in case there's any disputes about intellectual property rights, one can go back to this publication of, let's say, 2010 and say in 2010, we have recorded that Jan Baatjies gave us that information. So it gives a legal starting point. So in conclusion, I'd like to just quickly summarize and say that we need to comply with international protocols and international legislation, and therefore ethnobotanical knowledge is important to fully comply with the aims and ambitions of those conventions. We need to engage and empower local communities to record their precious knowledge for future generations, and to make sure that the younger generation remains interested in the ways of the past. There's an aeroplane going overhead, so I'm just... Then the third aspect is encouraging sustainable use through education and active participation. And this can be done through these conferences and interactions with local communities and the feedback process. And then documenting high quality data for potential future socioeconomic development. We need to know the details. Is the plant safe? How is it used? How is it processed? All the details are important. Gaining knowledge about traditional uses, gaining knowledge about traditional taboos associated with sustainable harvesting, and then basically preserving precious knowledge about nature for future generations. So I hope that you have gained some insights into the way we do it in South Africa, and perhaps also the way that it should be done by everyone. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will ask the public if there are some questions. Tenemos preguntas. Please, Victor. Vamos a hacerlas en inglés primero para que comprenda, y en español para traducirlas, ¿sí? Entonces, so we will do the questions in English so that you can follow them, but also we will translate them in Spanish for people here. Please, Victor.
Thank you for your conference, and I realize you got more than 24 years of research in this topic, but also it was very interesting to know that your work is also applying in the regulation, in the national regulations. In terms of that, there is a biological protection very clear now. The question is, it's also included in the process to protect the molecular information. Is possible people is also obtaining from your data, from your books, from your plants that you know, with all the information. For example, stomach aches or back pains. All of that should be used in terms for the pharmaceutical products. So that's the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood, but perhaps I can just ask, did you ask me if the molecular aspects of the plant should also be protected?
Yeah.
Yes, and of course, that is the whole idea of this legislation. As I explained, that in South Africa, we distinguished two phases. We distinguish between the discovery phase of, for example, chemical studies of plants. And then we have also a bioprospecting phase. And the two phases are different in the sense that if you are a scientist and your only ambition is to publish a paper on, let's say, new chemical compounds of a plant, then you do not have to have a permit. You do not have to go through the whole process of applying for a permit, etc. Obviously, to collect the plants, you need a permit, right? To make sure that you don't destroy nature and so on. So there's some permits required for collecting plants and even for transporting them across provincial boundaries and so on. But you don't need a permit for bioprospecting. As soon as your aim with your work is to make a product or to start selling things, then you need a permit, and then the requirements are very strict. I think this is a sensible distinction, because many scientists, they don't care, they don't want to make money, they are curiosity driven. They want to publish a paper, they want to learn more about nature and about chemical variation and so on. For example, chemosystematics is still quite an active topic. So in South Africa, it's only when you aspire to make money out of a particular project, then you are obliged to follow the rules. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, Ben. There is another question. Thank you for this question. I think it is very important to regulate also the uses of knowledge internationally and nationally also, to push governments to regulate this kind of things. There is another question. Please, Cecilia.
Hello, sorry for my English. I have some question. For example, in Isla de Juárez here in the Sierra Norte, we have a very serious problem because the new generation have lost the knowledge of traditional use. What do you recommend in this case, for example, for us, for research to do in this case? Because this area is very important in Mexico and in the world. It's very, very, very rich in endemisms and traditional use. What do you recommend for us?
Well, if the knowledge is lost, it's lost, right?
Yes.
And it can never be regained. But maybe you can consider putting more effort into trying to locate people with traditional knowledge. Very often, the knowledgeable people in a village or in a community are not the ones that play politics and that's in the forefront. They are usually hidden, well hidden somewhere. And very often I have discovered, for example, I go to Van Rensdorp, let's say it's a town in South Africa, and I ask around and I say, oh goodness, all the knowledge is lost. Everyone I talk to, and then suddenly someone tells me, but listen, there's a guy staying there outside the village in his little house there. Maybe you should speak to him. And then I go there and then I see the most wonderful information. So maybe one must just make sure that the knowledge is not lost. And that's not an easy thing to do, because you have to theoretically at least talk to everyone to make sure that you do not have individuals in the community that's still very knowledgeable. I think it's possible. Just like I became a professor because I'm interested in plants, right? And so you do have people in rural areas that are, from a young age, are particularly interested in plants and in biology, nature, whatever. And maybe you have a chance to still recover something if you can just discover the right people. I hope so. I hold my thumbs for you. But if it's lost, it's lost. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have other question. I have curiosity because you say that 60% of the species of cave are endemic. How many of these species are or have used traditional knowledge? Do you know this exactly, or?
Kalina, help me a little bit. Did I hear correctly?
Yes.
I couldn't hear well, but she's asked me if I have knowledge about the endemic species.
No.
The uses of endemic species.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yes, it is that one.
Yes.
It's the uses of endemic species. No.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
The uses of endemic species.
Yes.
Yes.
No, that's very clear. We have such high levels of endemism in South Africa that practically, well, many of the endemic species are used. So if you look at South African flora in general, then I think the level of endemism is about 70%. In the Cape fynbos, it's about 60% or so. And you have many, even commercialized plants that are endemic to the Cape. Rooibos tea, for example, famous tea, endemic to the Cape. Honeybush tea, endemic to the Cape. Pugu, endemic to the Cape, and so on. So no, there are many endemic species that are linked to traditional knowledge and to traditional uses. But what you are asking raises an important question, and I'm going to follow up now. I think you are clever by asking this question, because one can now compare. Is the percentage of endemic species lower or higher than the general species? Are more endemic species used than normal species or not? That comparison has not been made formally. I don't think there's a difference, but it'll be interesting to find out and make sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. I don't know if there's another question, but maybe, I don't know, there is some need to translate. We can continue in English without any problem.
Buenos días. En mi comunidad no tenemos como esa cultura de la conservación, ¿no? Etnobotánica. Entonces, mi pregunta sería, ¿cómo podríamos iniciar o inculcar esta parte, ¿no?
Cuéntale un poquito de tu comunidad.
La comunidad se llama Guelatado de Juárez, es acá abajo, aquí en la comunidad. Guelatado de Juárez. Así es. Sí, y bueno, sí existen pensamientos de pobladores, ¿no? Que sí tienen este interés, sin embargo, no es masivo, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo podríamos despertar este interés de conservar esta parte? Gracias.
No, gracias. So, Ben, there is a young guy here in the public who is from Guelatao. Guelatao is a town close to Ixtlan, and it is a place for Mexican people important, historically important, because it is the birthplace of one of the most famous presidents of Mexico, Benito Juárez, and it is very known, Guelatao, Oaxaca. And he's asking us, he's a little bit worried because in this place, he has the idea that people is not really knowing biodiversity, is not really, the knowledge, the botanical knowledge is very low. And he's asking how to do, which strategy we can do to improve the knowledge of people, the botanical knowledge of people in Guelatao. What do you think?
Yeah, you mean improve the recorded, the records of knowledge, or improve the local people's knowledge about nature? Because there's two different things. You can record the knowledge, to try to record everything, and try to find people with a lot of knowledge to summarize it and to record it. You can also try to inspire the people to become more aware of how important and how precious such information is. And so that can be done through schools, for example. So the children ask the grandmother, please, grandmother, tell us how you use this plant and that plant, so that you generate a general interest and a general enthusiasm for traditional knowledge. I don't know if it's the same in Mexico, but in South Africa, rural people often feel that their knowledge about plants is not important. It's just, it's too simple to consider. It's not of interest to anyone else. And it takes a scientist or an enthusiast to point out to them how important that information is, and that it is worthwhile to keep it and to look after it and to record it for posterity. So maybe that is one approach. So I'm also involved with another academic. He's an educator. He's now at the University of Western Cape. And we have a project where we teach the teachers on how to incorporate indigenous knowledge into the school curriculum and to inspire school children to become aware of traditional knowledge and to develop. And amongst those, you will probably find future professors and future academics who has a natural interest in plants and in knowledge about plants. So I think the education aspect is really very important. So I think it's a matter of communicating with local people and trying to still find people with knowledge. It's often the older people that has the knowledge. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
Yes, I will ask. Bueno, él plantea que hay dos situaciones posibles, ¿no? Una donde realmente no hay ningún conocimiento, pero eso en realidad él considera que no es muy posible, que seguramente hay gente que tiene conocimiento. Entonces, si es así, la idea es comunicarse con esa gente y tratar de que ellos compartan el conocimiento con las nuevas generaciones a través de pláticas, escuelas, de reconocer a la gente que conoce, ¿no? Que tiene ese conocimiento etnobotánico, reconocerla, ¿sí? Y tratar pues, primero que lo comente, que lo comunique con las nuevas generaciones, pero también tratar de generar publicaciones, libros, ¿no? Se quede el conocimiento, que el conocimiento vaya también pues siendo documentado, ¿no? Eso es la propuesta, la estrategia que te propone. Él no considera que realmente, igual que le contestó a la doctora, que no es una pérdida total. Seguramente hay gente que tiene conocimiento etnobotánico, entonces esa gente hay que precisamente buscarla, ¿no? Y tratar de aprovechar ese conocimiento y que sea capaz de transmitirlo a las nuevas generaciones, ¿no? Gracias por tu pregunta. Víctor, había otra pregunta.
Kalina, may I
Yes.
ask a question,
Yes.
please?
Yes, where are you? Who are you?
I'm in South Carolina.
Robbie.
Yes, how are you doing?
Hello, Robbie. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. But I have a statement to make to the gentleman, please. And I appreciate your project and all. And I want to say one of the things I say about, I work with about a half a dozen of the first peoples of Mesoamerica. And I'll be talking about an education project here in a few minutes. But what I want to tell you is that one of the ways I like to talk about these other ecological knowledge systems is that, whereas Europeans, they only have a few hundred years of what we really call peer review, whereas our indigenous sisters and brothers have 1,000 generations of peer review, teaching them everything they need to know to operate properly in these ecosystems. And I just wanted to throw that out there at you and tell you that I really appreciate your work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's kind of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Robbie. So Robbie will have a presentation of a book the next. Yeah, I think, at which hour is your presentation? 10:15?
10:15 is 10:15. Is it in this room or in?
I didn't get it. Excuse me.
Yeah, at 10:15 in just a few minutes.
Yes, exactly. In a few minutes.
Will it be here or do I need to go someplace else?
Yeah. So the problem is that we have a simultaneous another event, the symposium, and it will be not very easy to be everywhere. But,
Okay, mil gracias por todos.
But it is very nice that you are here because you heard already, Ben is also working for this knowledge, this ethnobotanical knowledge, and also you with your book and with your projects. Thank you, Robbie. No sé si hay otra pregunta, otro comentario, por favor.
Sí, sobre el protocolo de Nagoya, dos preguntas derivadas. Uno, si el protocolo de Nagoya ha contribuido al avance de la etnobiología. Segunda,
en la práctica, que
Ben, there is
Yes.
a very, very interesting question here
Yes.
about the Nagoya Protocol.
Yeah.
The question is if you think that the Nagoya Protocol was really it was
Improving the biology knowledge.
yeah, improving the biological or ethnobotanical knowledge. If there is really a link or a correlation between the protocol, the Nagoya Protocol, and the progress more than improvement, progress of ethnobotanical knowledge or knowledge about biodiversity in general more.
Yes. Kalina, I'm very skeptical about the Nagoya Protocol, because if the Nagoya Protocol is properly implemented, and why should it not be retroactively implemented, then Mexicans would probably be some amongst the richest people in the world. I think also if we can get a few cents per kilogram for coffee, then Ethiopia will look completely different to what it is looking at the moment. So in my opinion, it is a very good idea that people should be compensated for the use of their resources and so on. But there are quite a number of practical difficulties. For example, in Southern Africa, you have an exchange of information between cultures. You cannot link the use of a particular plant to a particular culture. Why? Because the intellectuals of the different cultures would take care to go to other cultures and to all other regions and improve their knowledge, just like we go on conferences, international conferences. So people in former times, rural people in former times, the intellectuals, the illiterate intellectuals of the past, made exchanges with other intellectuals in other cultures. And so the source of the information is not clear. So now there's a material transfer agreement between a particular group or a tribe, if you like, but the knowledge actually came from another one. In Africa, it's also problematic because many of our plants also occur in East Africa and in Southern Africa, in Namibia or in Botswana. And so while the regulations are applied in South Africa, bioprospectors may choose to get the information and their resources from another country. So I think in summary, it's a very good idea to compensate people for their resources or for their knowledge, but one should not create false expectations, for one. And I think in many cases, it's totally impractical to try to link a particular group of people to a particular plant, because often it has to be artificial. You have to choose some community to benefit, but many communities actually use the plant. So it becomes a little bit unscientific, I would say. So I'm not sure if the Nagoya Protocol has actually promoted the recording of information. I think it may even have done damage, because people are hesitant. People are now do not feel free to share, because they think maybe my knowledge can be used to make money and so on. So then you start having secrecy. And if you want to kill science, you have to start dealing with secrets. Because why do we publish in science? We publish because we want to make it known to the world. It's one of the cornerstones of science, is being open and being honest and not being secretive. And now you are sort of encouraging people to keep secrets. So I always in my work tell people, please do not burden me with your secrets. I don't want your secret. I don't like your secret. If it's a secret, it's a secret. Then keep it for yourself. Don't even mention it. See, Yeah, so, Dan Moorman, who was the president, or he was the editor of Economic Botany in South Africa at our conference, he said, secrecy sucks. That's now an American expression to say secrecy sucks. In science, we don't deal with secrets. No, never. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So Mario, do you want to discuss a little bit about Está ligada? Okay. So it was another question, but it is related to this one you were already answering. ¿Alguna otra pregunta, comentario con respecto al conocimiento etnobotánico, a lo que estuvo platicando el doctor, a sus propias comunidades? So I only to tell you, we are actually in Oaxaca, and Oaxaca, it is really a mix between high biodiversity and also high diversity, cultural diversity. There is a region in Mexico where you can find really both very high level. So, and it is really interesting to see how people is, I think the knowledge, the botanical knowledge in Oaxaca is surely also very high. And so maybe we have to do something here, Ben, to work here also with the communities, to use your indexes of knowledge, know the knowledge of people. Like, okay,
Yeah.
if there is, excuse me, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's the systematic way in which we record data that is more valuable. It's not so much the index, but the way in which we prepare this flip file, and where we make sure that we cover all the plants of a particular region. That's a lot of work to do. And I think that's why people would shy away from it. But I think, you know, Kalina, to me, indigenous knowledge is like a beautiful flower. You put it in a pot in your house, you look at the flower, you appreciate the flower. And maybe we appreciate the flower because we know soon it will die. It's only temporary. And some days I feel like that about our precious indigenous knowledge, is that we appreciate it so much because we know that we have already lost a large part of it, probably, and that we will probably still lose a lot of it. And that we try desperately to keep the flower alive by recording information about the flower. That's how I feel about it.
It's romantic. Nice, nice, Ben. So in Zoom or in the virtual, in the net, so we have some questions, other questions. Do you see some other questions? No? Ah, okay, excuse me. No, there are no more questions, Ben. Thank you another time for your conference. It was very successful.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And see you soon here in Mexico. We are.
Yes, next week, Kalina, next week?
Next week, yes. Yeah.
Next week?
It's true, yeah, next week.
Great.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
Right.
See
So
you.
I can leave now, right, Kalina?
Yeah, you
Right.
can leave now. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Have a
Goodbye,
nice day.
everyone.
Bye. Pues muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí, por las interesantes preguntas.